The engagement cake she had spent 3 weeks building belonged to the man she had spent 8 months trying to survive. Grace did not know this yet. Her hands were still moving. 8 months of arriving before dawn had trained them to keep working regardless of what her eyes reported. She was piping the final detail on the third tier when the footsteps stopped inside her bakery. Not slowed. Stopped. She looked up. He was standing inside the entrance in a black suit with flour dust floating in the light between them, and a woman in cream silk holding his arm the way a person holds something they are not willing to put down. The woman was already smiling. It was the precise, prepared smile of someone watching a plan arrive at the moment they have been waiting for. Grace's hand slowed. His eyes found her face for 1 second, then dropped. They found the curve beneath her black apron, and they stopped there. She watched him count backward, through 8 months of silence, through every call she had not made, every letter she had not sent, every morning she had stood in this bakery and chosen to build something instead of collapse. She watched him arrive at the number he was looking for, and she watched the number change his face entirely. The woman beside him tilted her head. "We requested you personally," she said. "The design you created last spring. No one else produces work like yours." Grace looked down at the order form on the counter. She had accepted this booking 6 weeks ago. The client name on the form meant nothing to her. She had taken the commission because the payment was 3 times her standard rate, and the bakery's lease renewal was 40 days away. She looked at the name printed 1 line below. The cake under her hands had always been his. The woman who ordered it already knew about the child growing beneath Grace's apron. She had known before she made the call. She had known before she chose the bakery. She had known before she walked through that door with his arm in her hand, and a smile Grace now understood had nothing to do with cake. Grace set the decorating tool down on the marble counter. She looked at the man who had vanished from her life without a single word she could trust. He was still counting. She had been counting longer. "Close the door," Grace said, "or leave." She picked the tool back up and returned to the cake. Her hands did not shake. The woman's smile did not move. And the man in the black suit had still not taken a single step further into the room, because some part of him already understood that the moment he did, nothing about his carefully arranged future would survive the next 10 minutes. He stepped further into the room. Grace had given him a choice, and he had made it, and now the 3 of them occupied the same air with nothing between them except marble counter and the unfinished cake she had spent 3 weeks building for his future. Minsua released his arm. She moved to the display counter with the ease of someone making a second visit to a room she had already memorized. Her fingers tracked the edge of the glass case. Her eyes moved across every tier. "The craftsmanship is exceptional," she said. "Exactly what we envisioned." Grace looked at Kang Seo-hyun. He was not looking at the cake. She had told herself, in the 8 months since he disappeared, that she had already survived the worst of what seeing him again would feel like. She had been wrong. Not because of the pain, because of the specific way he was looking at her, like a man reading a letter he wrote himself and no longer recognized. "I want to discuss the delivery arrangement," Grace said. Sua turned from the display case. "Of course. But first, the gold flower detail on the second tier." She opened a slim portfolio and placed a photograph beside the order form. "This pattern. Where does it come from?" Grace looked at the photograph. It was a close image of her own design, taken before she had accepted this commission, taken from an angle that was not public, taken from inside this bakery. "It is a family pattern," Grace said, "not available for other orders." Sua smiled. "That is precisely why we wanted it." Seo-hyun had still not spoken. He stood near the counter with his hands at his sides and his jaw at the angle Grace recognized from the night he told her that some problems required patience rather than speed. She had believed him then. She had stopped believing a great many things since. Sua closed the portfolio. "You have been standing all morning." Her voice carried the particular warmth of someone who had practiced it. "That must be difficult." She let her gaze settle on Grace's stomach with the open curiosity of a person who already knows every number involved. "How many months?" The question was quiet, deliberate. Grace looked at her directly. "7," she said. Sui nodded, as if this confirmed something she had written down somewhere. Seo-hyun moved for the first time, not toward the door. One step toward the counter. His eyes went to Grace's stomach and stayed. She watched him calculate. She recognized the precise moment the number resolved into meaning because his next breath arrived differently than the one before it. 7 months placed the beginning of the pregnancy in a single week, the last week they were together. He looked up at Grace. She looked back at him and gave him nothing. "Thursday," she said. "The cake will be ready Thursday." 7 months earlier, Grace arrived at the bakery at 4:45 in the morning because the alternative was lying in a dark apartment, counting the ways her life had divided itself into before and after. Work was better than counting. She had opened Flower & Gold 11 months ago with the savings from 6 years of taking other people's commissions and none of her own credit. The shop occupied a narrow space on a street that was becoming expensive faster than her lease could absorb. The front window held her best work. The back room held the reality. 2 ovens, one of which ran 15 degrees inconsistent. A standing mixer with a handle she had repaired twice with materials she should not have used, and a notebook containing numbers she reviewed every Sunday and closed without finishing. She was making it work. Barely. Honestly. Alone. At 6:15, her assistant B arrived with her coat still buttoned and sleep still in her eyes, and found Grace removing a 4-tier white cake from the cooling rack with the focus of a person dismantling something dangerous. "That is for the Adiemi wedding," B said. The bottom tier cracked overnight. Grace did not look up. "I am remaking it." "The wedding is Saturday." "I know when the wedding is." B set her bag down and began washing her hands. She did not argue. In 4 months of working together, she had learned that Grace remade things that other bakers would have delivered without apology, and that there was no productive conversation to be had about the difference between sufficient and right. By 9 o'clock, the replacement tier was cooling, and Grace was sketching the gold flower detail she had been developing for 3 weeks. She had found the pattern in a recipe card left to her by the woman who had trained her, a pastry chef named Adizi, who had died 2 winters ago, and left Grace her notebooks, her tools, and a sealed envelope Grace had not yet allowed herself to open. The pattern was intricate, layered, each petal built from a series of lines so fine they required a tip Grace had modified herself. She had not offered it to any client. It felt like something she was still borrowing. Her phone rang at 10. She looked at the screen. No name. A city code she did not recognize. She let it ring. It called again at noon. At 2. At 2:47. She did not answer any of them. At 4 o'clock, A written inquiry arrived through the bakery's contact form. Anonymous client. An engagement cake commission. The payment offered was 3 times her highest rate. There was one condition. The inquiry stated it plainly, without explanation. The baker must make the cake personally and must be present for the final delivery. Grace read the condition twice. She looked at the gold flower sketch on her workbench. She opened a new page in her notebook and wrote down the number. The Sunday figures had been bad. She accepted the commission. He came into the bakery 4 months before he vanished from it. Not as Kang Seo-hyun, not as the second son of the Kang Group whose photograph appeared twice a year in business publications. He came as a man in a black coat who sat at the single table near the window and studied the display case for 11 minutes before ordering anything. Grace brought the order herself. She was short-staffed that afternoon. "The white one," he said, "with the gold detail." She looked at him directly. "That piece is not for sale. It is a display model." "Everything has a price." "Not in this bakery." He ordered the almond cake instead, ate it without rushing. When he left, he placed a note beside the payment. "The gold detail is extraordinary." He came back the following Tuesday, and the one after that. Their relationship built itself in the hours after B went home, and the ovens cooled. He never arrived announced. He never stayed past midnight. He asked about the work with the attention of someone who intended to remember the answers, and Grace found she had been waiting a long time for someone to ask exactly that. She knew his name by the 3rd visit. She searched it by the 4th. What she found told her the distance between his world and hers was not a gap. It was a structure, built deliberately, maintained at cost. She told him this plainly. He did not deny it. He said he was aware of the structure and working on a solution. She believed him because nothing in 3 months had given her reason not to. That was the fact she returned to later, when returning to facts was all she had. He had been careful, patient, consistent. The man who disappeared without a word did not match the man who stayed through 3 months of Tuesday evenings and one long rainy Saturday when he tried, badly, to temper chocolate, and she laughed at him without softening it. The message arrived on a Wednesday morning. From his verified account, clean language, no explanation. Their arrangement had been a mistake. Continuing contact would create complications. He wished her well. Grace read it 4 times. She went to work. 6 days later, she took a test in the bathroom of her own bakery before B arrived. She had carried a chair in from the front room because her legs had made a decision without consulting her. She looked at the result. Her phone screen lit beside her hand. A news alert. Kang Seo-hyun at a formal dinner. A woman in cream at his side. A family spokesperson confirming the engagement. The test was still positive. The woman in the photograph was using the same smile she had brought into the bakery that morning. The same smile. The same preparation behind it. Grace had assumed that visit was something falling apart. It had been a conclusion, already written before she arrived. Sue stayed 40 minutes. She discussed fondant consistency, delivery timing, and the precise temperature of the room where the cake would be displayed. She asked intelligent questions. She complimented Grace's technique twice more, with the fluency of someone who had researched what to say before arriving. Seo-hyun stood near the entrance and said nothing. Grace answered every question without looking at him. This required concentration, the kind that left marks. At the 20-minute mark, Seo-hyun moved toward the counter with the specific intention of someone who had decided to speak regardless of the cost. Suwa reached his side in 2 steps. She placed a hand on his arm and directed his attention to the sketch on the counter with the smoothness of a person who had practiced interrupting him without appearing to. "The flowers on the second tier," she said. "Are these edible gold?" "Painted sugar," Grace said. "Extraordinary." Suwa leaned closer to the sketch. "You designed this bakery interior yourself, didn't you? The shelving along the east wall is custom. I read your interview in the Crescent Street feature last spring." Grace looked at her. The Crescent Street feature had never been published. It had been scheduled, then pulled when the publication folded. The interview existed in a draft that had never left the journalist's laptop. "I don't recall that interview running," Grace said. Suwa smiled at the sketch. "Perhaps I am thinking of something else." She was not thinking of something else. Grace set both hands flat on the counter. Her mind moved quickly through the commission timeline. The anonymous inquiry, the unusual payment, the condition that she be present at delivery, the gold flower pattern photographed from inside the bakery before the commission was accepted. Suwa looked up. "The building that houses this property changed management recently. Did the new lease terms give you any trouble? Property transitions can be so disruptive for small businesses." The bakery lease was managed through a property firm Grace's solicitor had handled on her behalf. It was not public information. The lease renewal was in 40 days. Grace had not told anyone except her solicitor about the timeline. "I manage my business well," Grace said. "Of course you do." Suwa gathered the portfolio. "Thursday, then." So-hyun had not moved from the counter. His eyes were on Grace with an expression she could not use, because reading it would require giving him more access than she currently had to spare. Suwa touched his arm once. He followed her toward the door. At the entrance, she stopped and turned back with the ease of someone retrieving a forgotten item. She placed a sealed envelope on the counter beside the unfinished cake. "For your records," she said. The door closed. Grace opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph, taken from a distance, at an angle she would not have noticed if she had not been looking. Her own face. The entrance of her prenatal clinic. 4 months ago, written across it in clean ink. "Leave before he learns whose child this is." He came back at closing time. Grace heard the knock and knew before she reached the door. She had spent 3 hours finishing the cake's second tier, with the photograph face down on the counter, because looking at it added nothing useful to what she already understood. She opened the door. She did not step aside. "You have 30 minutes, she said. "Then I lock up." He came in. He did not sit. He stood in the center of the bakery with his hands in his pockets and looked at her the way a man looks when he has rehearsed several versions of a conversation, and none of them fit the room he is standing in. "The message you sent," Grace said. "Mistake, complications, good wishes." "I did not send that message. It came from your account." "I know which account it came from." He pulled out his phone and placed it on the counter between them. "Show me what you received." She showed him. He looked at it for a long time. His expression did not perform anything. It simply changed in the way that genuine recognition changes a face, without warning and without edges. "This was sent from a device registered to my account," he said. "I did not write it. I did not authorize it." Grace looked at him. "You disappeared," she said. 7 days. No call, no presents. Just that message, and then a photograph of you and Suwa at a dinner your family arranged. "I was told you had accepted a payment," he said. "From a competitor. that you had passed confidential information about a private investment my family was negotiating. He met her eyes directly. I was shown a transfer record, your name, your account details. The bakery was very quiet. I tried to reach you, Grace said, 14 times over 9 days. Your assistant told me you were unavailable. Then he told me the number had changed. Then the call stopped connecting entirely. Seo Hyun was still. Who handled your communications during that period? Grace said. It was not a question. He already knew the answer. She could see it arriving in him the same way the pregnancy arithmetic had arrived that morning. A number resolving into something that changed the entire shape of what came before it. He reached for his phone. He opened a security application she did not recognize and entered a long code. A report populated the screen. Call logs. Message routing records. 2 months of communications, flagged and filtered through a single internal account. Every message she had sent him. Every message he had sent that never reached her. All of it passing through one set of hands. He turned the screen toward her. She read the name at the top of the routing record. Your assistant, she said. Yes. Grace looked at the unfinished cake. Then neither of us ended this, she said. No, he said. Someone else did. Park Jin-ho had worked for Seo Hyun for 6 years. He was the kind of assistant who anticipated problems before they were named, who managed schedules with the precision of someone who understood that time, in the Kong family, was a form of currency. Seo Hyun had trusted him with more than scheduling. He had trusted him with silence. Jin-ho opened the door to the private office before Seo Hyun knocked. He had been expecting this visit. His face confirmed it. Sit down, Seo Hyun said. Jin-ho sat. He placed both hands on the table and looked at them the way a person looks at something they are finished lying about. All of it, Seo Hyun said. Jin-ho began with the instruction he had received 8 months ago, a directive from an internal executive address, routed through the family's private communications system. Intercept all contact between Seo Hyun and the baker. Redirect. Delay. If redirection failed, deliver the fabricated evidence of financial betrayal and allow the separation to complete itself. I told myself it was a family matter, Jin-ho said, that I was protecting you from a complication. You were protecting yourself, Seo Hyun said. Jin-ho did not argue. His daughter had been receiving treatment at a private medical facility for 14 months. The facility was owned by a healthcare subsidiary connected to Sua's family holdings. 2 months before the instruction arrived, Jin-ho had received a quiet communication from that subsidiary's administration. Treatment continuation was subject to ongoing review. He had understood the meaning without requiring clarification. I preserved everything, Jin-ho said. Every instruction, every routing record, every fabricated document. He opened the desk drawer and placed a sealed drive on the table. I kept copies because I needed to believe I had not completely become what they needed me to be. Seo Hyun looked at the drive. The surveillance on her bakery, he said. How long? Jin-ho looked up. You know about that. I know enough. How long? 4 months. Since the pregnancy became visible. Seo Hyun stood. There is something else, Jin-ho said. He opened his laptop and turned the screen forward. This arrived in the family's legal archive 3 weeks ago, flagged as dormant. I almost missed it. The document carried the Kong Group's oldest internal seal. The date at the top placed its creation 16 years back. The language was dense, formal, and structured around a single operational condition. Seo Hyun read the title. Succession Contingency. Biological firstborn provision. He read the first clause, then the second. The room did not change. The light through the office window was the same light it had been 60 seconds ago. But something in the arrangement of everything Seo Hyun thought he understood about his own life had just shifted into a configuration that made the engagement, the separation, the fabricated evidence, and the photograph sent to Grace read not as isolated cruelties, but as a single coordinated structure. Someone had known about this clause long before he did. Someone had been building against it for months. The lawyer's name was Hwang Chul-soo. He was 71 years old and had served the Kong family's legal affairs for 34 years, which meant he had outlasted 3 board restructurings, 2 inheritance disputes, and 1 attempted hostile acquisition. He had survived all of it by knowing precisely which information to surface and which to keep below the waterline. He had kept the succession document below the waterline for 16 years. He met Seo Hyun in a private room above a restaurant that did not take reservations. He arrived before Seo Hyun. He had the document already open on the table. "Your grandfather drafted this 4 months before he died," Hwang said. He did not file it through the standard family legal structure. He filed it through an independent notary and registered it with the National Corporate Authority under a dormancy clause. It activates automatically under specific conditions. Seo Hyun sat down. "The condition," Hwang said, "is the birth of your first biological child." The language of the clause was precise in the way that language written by someone who expects to be argued with is always precise. Upon confirmed biological parenthood, controlling interest in the Kang Group's founding shares transferred from the current family trust into a protected succession vessel. Seo Hyun would not own those shares. He would manage them as the child's legal guardian until the child reached majority. The practical consequence was absolute. The current chairman lost majority control. The merger arrangement underpinning the engagement dissolved. Sua's family, whose position at the Kang Group table depended entirely on that merger, lost their seat. Every person who had built their future against the structure of Seo Hyun's arranged marriage lost their foundation the moment Grace's child drew its first breath. "The wedding date," Seo Hyun said, "was moved 3 times, Hwang confirmed. Each move placed the ceremony closer to the projected due date. The current date sits 11 days before the date your family's private medical consultant estimated for the birth. If the marriage completes before the birth. The clause carries a secondary provision. A legal spouse without biological parenthood retains standard inheritance rights. The succession vessel remains dormant. Seo Hyun looked at the document. The engagement was not a marriage arrangement. It was a filing, a legal instrument designed to reach the finish line before a child could be born and change every number on every document that kept the current power structure intact. Grace's pregnancy was not a personal complication to the Kong family. It was a corporate event they had been trying to prevent. Hwang reached across the table and turned the document to its final page. "There is one element I cannot explain. The dormancy registration contains an embedded identifier, a symbol. I have seen it once before, but never determined its origin." He placed a copied image beside the document. Seo Hyun looked at it. Then he looked up. It was Grace's gold flower pattern. Exact, down to the finest line. Hwang said quietly, "Where does that design come from?" Grace did not receive visitors in the back room. She brought Seo Hyun and Hwang Chul-soo there anyway because the front of the bakery had windows, and what she was about to show them required walls. She unlocked the storage cabinet above the secondary work table. Behind 2 tins of imported cocoa and a box of specialty tips she had never used, she kept a flat wooden case the size of a hardcover book. She placed it on the table and opened it. Inside, protected by cloth she had changed twice in 2 years, was a handwritten recipe card. A daisy had pressed it into Grace's hands the last time Grace saw her alive. Keep this one separate from the others. Do not file it with the notebooks. Do not discuss it. When the time is right, you will understand what I mean by that. Grace had assumed grief made people cryptic. She had kept the card because a daisy had asked her to. Hwang crossed the room before Seo Hyun did. He stood over the card and studied it in silence for 20 seconds. Then he reached into his jacket and removed a small lens, the kind used for document examination, and held it over the lower right corner of the card where the flower pattern appeared smallest and most compressed. There, he said, not the pattern itself. Inside the pattern, worked into the negative space between the innermost petals, in lines so fine they read as texture rather than form, was the same identifier embedded in the succession document's dormancy registration. The same seal, identical. Your mentor, Hwang said. Her name. Adeze Okonkwo, Grace said. She trained in Seoul before I was born. She came back and opened a small patisserie. She never discussed that period. Hwang straightened. She worked in the Kong Group's hospitality division 32 years ago. She was the personal chef to Kang Dae-won during the last 4 years of his life. Grace looked at the card. The recipe covered the front in a daisy's familiar handwriting. Flour ratios, resting temperatures, timing notes in the margins. Grace had read it so many times the paper had softened at the fold. Hwang turned the card over with practiced care. The reverse side appeared blank. He held the examination lens over it and directed his phone light at a low angle across the surface. Numbers emerged from the paper, pressed rather than written, invisible under direct light, readable only at an angle that changed how the surface caught shadow. Account identifiers. A registration code Grace did not recognize. A sequence of numbers that Hwang read once and went very still. These correspond to the original share certificates, he said. The ones reported destroyed in a records fire 18 years ago. He looked at Seo Hyun. The fire that allowed the current ownership structure to be filed without contestation. Grace looked at the card in her hands. She had been making cakes with this pattern for 2 years. The lights went out. From the storage room at the back of the bakery came the first thin thread of smoke. Grace moved first. She closed the wooden case and put it under her arm before either man had processed the darkness. She had designed the back room herself. She knew where every surface was. The storage room, she said. Away from it. The smoke was thin but purposeful, the kind that comes not from an accident, but from something placed deliberately against something else. Grace had worked around commercial ovens long enough to know the difference between a mistake and an intention. Seo Hyun was already at the storage room door. He pressed the back of his hand against it before opening it. The door was warm but not hot. He opened it 6 inches. Inside, a cloth had been packed against the base of the archive shelf where Grace kept her oldest records. Business filings, lease documents, Adiz's notebooks. The cloth was burning steadily. Seo Hyun went in. Grace followed. He pulled the burning material away from the shelf with his bare hands and dropped it into the metal sink in the corner. Grace turned the tap. The smoke thickened briefly, then flattened. He had burned his right palm. He did not mention it. Grace pulled the notebooks from the shelf and checked each one. The flames had not reached them. The original recipe card was still under her arm. She checked the case. Intact. Huang appeared at the doorway. "We need to leave. If someone set this, they may still be close." "1 minute," Grace said. She opened the bottom drawer of the archive shelf. The lease documents were there. She checked the folder behind them. The prenatal records she kept at the bakery for practical reasons, distance to the clinic, appointment schedules, all present. She looked at the base of the shelf where the cloth had been placed. It was not near the ovens. It was not near any electrical fitting. It sat precisely against the section of shelving that held original business registration documents and the lease agreement. Not the cake supplies, not the equipment, the paperwork. Huang was correct. This was not a warning. Someone had sent a person into her bakery to remove the foundation of her legal claim to it. Seo-hyun looked at his palm once and closed his hand. "The front door was locked," Grace said. "It was locked when I arrived," Seo-hyun confirmed. Grace looked at the storage room door. The internal access panel beside it controlled the rear entry. A small green indicator light showed the last entry code accepted. She looked closer. The entry log showed a code used 40 minutes ago while she had been with Huang and Seo-hyun in the front room. She photographed the panel. Then she pulled the bakery's external camera application on her phone. The rear entry footage showed a figure in the narrow service corridor behind the building. Professional, unhurried, carrying nothing visible, entering, carrying a small bag leaving. On the figure's jacket, catching the corridor light for exactly 1 frame, was a security badge. Grace enlarged the image. The badge carried the Kang Group's private family access insignia. Not the corporate building. The family residence. Sua opened the hotel room door before Seo-hyun knocked. She had been expecting him too. It appeared to be a night full of people who had run out of time to pretend otherwise. She was still dressed. Her portfolio sat open on the desk. Beside it, a recording device Grace would have recognized as identical to the one Jinho had used to document his instructions. Sua looked at Seo-hyun, then at Grace. Something crossed her face that was not quite surprise and not quite relief. "I chose the bakery," she said before he spoke. "I chose it deliberately. I sent the photograph to her clinic. I had the lease investigated." She did not sit. "I will not waste time denying what you already know." "The fire," Seo-hyun said. "No." Her voice carried the specific quality of someone telling a truth they wish were a lie. "I threatened her. I did not touch her building." Grace watched her from across the room. "The badge on the camera footage," Grace said. "Family residence access?" "Which 12 people hold?" Sua said. "I am not one of them." Seo-hyun crossed toward the desk. He looked at the recording device without touching it. 3 months ago, Sua said, the chairman told my father that after the wedding, once the succession issue was contained, our family would hold 2 permanent board seats and a guaranteed stake in the Eastern acquisition. She paused. "Last week, I found a draft communication between the chairman and his legal team, dated 6 weeks ago. It outlined a post-marriage restructuring plan that removed my family's position entirely. We were the solution to the child problem. Once that problem was resolved, we were the next item to be managed." The room was quiet. "He used you," Seo-hyun said. He used everyone. She reached into the portfolio and removed a sealed document folder. Recorded communications, 3 months of them. The chairman confirming awareness of the pregnancy, ordering surveillance, authorizing the lease acquisition to pressure her out, instructing Jin Ho. She held the folder forward. He discussed the fire 2 days ago. He did not call it that. He called it a records management solution. Grace looked at the folder. What do you want for it? She said. Suwa met her eyes. I want written confirmation that I provided this voluntarily. I want my family's name separated from whatever investigation follows. She set the folder on the desk. I wanted his name. I did not want to become the next person he discarded when the name became inconvenient. Seo Hyun's phone lit on the desk beside the folder. A message from Jinho. 4 words. Chairman just moved the wedding. Below it, the new date. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Grace put one hand on the desk. Not for support. To steady something that had moved without her permission. The second contraction arrived before the first one had fully left. The contractions were 8 minutes apart. Grace knew the difference between early labor and the kind that waited. These were not waiting. She told Seo Hyun the number and watched him make the calculation she expected him to make. The hospital, he said. After, she said. Grace. If he completes this today, the clause is buried. My child spends the next 18 years as a legal inconvenience. She picked up the folder from the desk. After. The Kang Group's emergency shareholders' assembly had been called for 9 o'clock, under a provision allowing the chairman to accelerate votes during succession uncertainty. 41 people were already seated in the building's top-floor conference room when Seo Hyun walked in with Grace beside him and Hwang Chul-soo, 3 steps behind, carrying a case that contained everything. The chairman saw Grace first. He was 73 years old and had not achieved what he achieved by allowing his face to report his interior. But he looked at her stomach and then at the case in Hwang's hands, and for exactly 2 seconds, his composure showed its construction. This assembly is for shareholders, he said. Then I qualify, Seo Hyun said. Sit down. He had never spoken to his father's brother that way. The room understood what that meant before he said another word. He connected Hwang's drive to the room's display system. He did not explain what was coming. He let it speak in the chairman's own voice, recorded across 11 separate communications, confirming awareness of Grace's pregnancy, authorizing the lease acquisition, approving the surveillance, and discussing the bakery fire as a records management solution, while Grace's unborn child slept 8 floors below the building where those words were spoken. He presented the fabricated evidence used to separate them. He presented Jin Ho's routing records. He presented the succession document in his grandfather's hand. He presented the share certificate numbers from the back of Adeizi's recipe card. The chairman stood. This is fabricated. Every document. This woman has constructed a claim against this family, and you are standing in front of your own shareholders presenting it as truth. Which document is fabricated? Seo Hyun said. Tell me which one and I will remove it. Silence. I am removing myself from executive operations pending independent investigation, Seo Hyun said. I am filing the succession notification with the corporate authority this morning. And I am acknowledging my biological child before every person in this room. The chairman's voice dropped to the register he used when rooms needed to understand the cost of opposing him. You will lose everything. You built everything on a fraud that belongs to my grandfather's firstborn grandchild. Seo-hyun looked at him without anger and without performance. It was never yours to give. The room fractured into sound. Grace's hand found the back of a chair. The contraction arrived without warning or mercy, and her legs made their decision before she made hers. Seo-hyun caught her before she reached the floor. "Do not let them take my baby," she said. The baby arrived at 4:47 in the morning. A girl, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. A cry that filled the delivery room with the specific authority of someone who had already decided how much space she intended to occupy in the world. Grace held her and did not speak for a long time. Seo-hyun sat in the chair beside the bed, where Grace had placed him and nowhere else. He did not reach for the child. He did not reach for Grace. He understood without being told that proximity was not the same as permission, and that earning the difference would take longer than one night in a hospital where the woman who had built a life without him was recovering from doing the most demanding thing a person can do. He stayed because she had not asked him to leave. That was where it began. The investigation opened within 72 hours. The corporate authority froze the Kang Group's founding share transfer pending review of the documents Hwang filed. The chairman retained legal counsel and issued a public statement describing the proceedings as a coordinated attack on the family's integrity. The statement was published on a Tuesday. By Thursday, 2 board members had separated themselves from his position. Adizi's name appeared in the investigative record as a protected witness to the original ownership structure. 32 years after she had left Seoul carrying a recipe card and a sealed envelope, and the knowledge of what she had seen, her testimony, preserved in the document she had passed to Grace without explanation, was entered into a formal proceeding. The bakery lease was transferred into Grace's name outright, not as a settlement, as a correction. Seo-hyun did not return to executive operations. He accepted the suspension without contesting it, and used the months that followed to appear, consistently, in the places Grace allowed him to appear. The hospital, the bakery, twice a week, when Grace opened late and needed someone to manage the front while B was absent. The small park 3 streets over, where he learned, gradually and without rushing, how to hold a child who was beginning to recognize his face. He did not ask Grace for forgiveness. He asked her for time. She gave him the amount she could afford and not one moment more, and he accepted the terms without negotiating them. 6 months after the assembly, Flower and Gold reopened with a new sign above the door and a commission list extending 14 weeks forward. On the morning of the reopening, Seo-hyun arrived before dawn. Grace found him attempting to pipe the border on a small celebration cake she had designed the night before. His technique was poor. The line broke twice and recovered badly. She corrected his grip without remarking on it. Their daughter slept in the pram beside the work table, one fist pressed against her cheek, unbothered by the world that had fought so hard to prevent her arrival. The first cake had been built for a marriage founded on power. This one was smaller, imperfect, and made without witnesses. For the first time, neither of them needed the world to believe in their future. They only needed the courage to build it.